Have you ever looked at your electricity bill and just wondered why it keeps creeping up? Well, in Japan, there's a huge debate happening right now over one specific charge that everybody pays. And it really gets to the heart of the country's entire energy future. So yeah, let's get into it. At the center of this whole fight is this one little line item that might seem small, but believe me, it adds up. It's called the Renewable Energy Levy, and it's a surcharge that's tacked on to every single electricity bill in the country. But just how much are we talking about here? For a typical household, that levy works out to about 14,000 yen a year. You know, that's not nothing. And if you're a business, especially a small or medium-sized one, that cost can be a really big deal. So what exactly is this charge even paying for?
Okay, so this levy is the main piggy bank for something called the Fixed Price Kaitori Seido, or the FIT system. What it does is, it basically guarantees that power companies will buy electricity from renewable sources, think solar or wind, at a fixed, pretty generous price. The whole idea is to encourage investment and, really kickstart the growth of green energy. But as you can probably guess, not everyone thinks this is the best way to do it.
So in this explainer, we're going to break down this whole debate just like the source material did. We'll look at three main points of conflict: the economy, energy security, and of course, climate goals. And then we'll get to the judge's final decision on which side actually made the better argument.
All right, first up, the thing that hits closest to home for most people: money. Is this levy a painful burden that's hurting households and businesses? Or is it actually a smart, long-term benefit for the whole economy?
And the whole economic debate really boils down to this one question. The people who want to get rid of the levy, they see it as an unfair tax that's hitting everyone's wallet right now. But the people who want to keep it, they frame it as a critical investment that's going to pay off big time down the road. So for the anti-levy side, the argument is all about that immediate economic pain. They're saying this isn't just a small inconvenience, it's a real financial strain. It squeezes small businesses, which either have to eat the cost or pass it on to us as higher prices. And because it's a flat surcharge, it ends up hitting lower-income families the hardest. But the other side says, hold on, that's way too short-sighted. Their whole point is that this isn't a cost, it's an investment. By building up a domestic renewable energy industry, Japan can finally break free from its reliance on imported fossil fuels, the ones whose prices go completely wild. They're saying, sure, it costs some money now, but it's buying us price stability for the future.
And here's a chart that kind of backs them up. They argue that this investment is already paying off. See, thanks in large part to the system funded by the levy, the actual cost of generating solar power in Japan has dropped by around 70% since 2012. So they claim the system is working. It's making renewables cheaper and more competitive every year.
Okay, let's move on to our second clash, which is all about energy security. Now, this is a massive issue for a country like Japan that doesn't have a lot of its own natural resources. So the big question is, does the levy make Japan more secure by creating its own energy, or does it just create new problems? And again, we've got two completely opposite takes here. One side is warning that we're just trading our dependence on foreign oil for a dependence on foreign tech, especially solar panels made in China. But the other side says that any kind of domestic energy production is a vital step toward fixing Japan's dangerously low self-sufficiency. And that number, wow, it's pretty stark. As of 2021, Japan's energy self-sufficiency rate was only 11.8%. That's one of the lowest among all developed countries. So the supporters of the levy argue that growing domestic renewables is really the only realistic way to fix this and get more control over the country's own energy supply.
But the abolitionists come back with a really sharp counterargument. They ask a very tough question. If something like 70% of the solar panels we're installing are imported from China, are we really becoming more energy secure? Or are we just swapping our vulnerability to problems in the Middle East for a vulnerability to supply chain issues from one single country?
Now, the defense against that point is actually pretty strategic. The folks who support the levy basically say, you're right, that's a real problem, but it's not a problem with the levy itself. They argue it's an industrial policy issue. So the solution isn't to stop funding renewables, but to create other policies to support Japanese manufacturing, to diversify into things like geothermal and wind, and to build smarter grids to manage it all.
All right, this brings us to our third and final battleground, the environment. Japan has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. So is the levy an absolutely essential tool for hitting that target, or is it actually a flawed approach with some serious unintended consequences?
So on one side, critics say the system is inefficient, and worse, they point to actual environmental damage, like forests being cleared to build these giant mega solar farms, which can cause landslides and destroy habitats.
But on the other side, supporters say, look, flaws and all, this levy is absolutely essential. Without it, they argue, Japan has zero chance of meeting its climate promises.
And they've got a key number to back that up. According to Japan's Ministry of the Environment, the growth in renewable energy, which was largely driven by this levy system, helped cut the country's annual CO2 emissions by about 15% between 2012 and 2022. They say that's proof positive the whole thing is working just like it's supposed to.
Still, the side that wants to abolish the levy really presses on this point. They highlight reports from all over the country of poorly planned projects causing real harm. And the question they pose is a tough one. What is the point of green energy if the way you build it actually destroys the local environment? And much like the tech dependency argument, the comeback here is that this is a separate issue. The pro-levy side argues that these environmental problems are caused by weak regulations and a lack of proper oversight. So the fix isn't to get rid of the funding system, but to create better rules for these projects and actually enforce them.
So after hearing all three of these clashes, on the economy, on security, and on the climate, the source material actually lays out a formal judgment. A neutral judge weighed both sides to figure out who made the more persuasive case. So, who won?
But before we get to the result, here's how the decision was made. The judge looked at 4 key things. Was the argument consistent? Was the evidence solid? How good were the comebacks to the other side's points? And finally, how clear and convincing was the overall presentation?
And the winner was the affirmative side. The judge decided that the argument to abolish the renewable energy levy was, in the end, the more convincing one.
So why did they win? Well, the judge's reasoning came down to a few key things. First, that argument about the direct economic burden on families and businesses was just really powerful and relatable. The affirmative side also did a great job of showing that getting rid of the levy wasn't the end of the world. They argued that other policies, like a carbon tax or a different subsidy model, could do the same job with less of a direct hit on the public. And finally, their presentation was just clearer and easier for everyone to understand. Now, this verdict doesn't mean Japan is just giving up on renewable energy. Not at all. But it does signal a huge potential shift in how it's going to get there. So this whole debate over one little line on your bill has cracked open a much bigger question. If this system goes away, what comes next? How is Japan going to balance cost, security, and its climate goals for decades to come? And that is the real challenge ahead.